The conflicts of Yemen are too often forgotten by the world. There have been so many, one right after the other, and we've reached a point where none of us have been alive during a time of peace. As the war, which started all the way back in 2014, rages on, it's important to look at Yemen's history to understand where it all started. When you look at a map of today's conflict in Yemen, you can see a very distinct divide between who controls the north and south. That's because, until 1990, Yemen was divided into two countries, and the conflict we see today draws a lot of similarities from the North Yemen Civil War of the 1960s, when the country was divided by two contrasting ideologies for Islamic governance. In this video, we're going to dive into the North Yemen Civil War and discover why this conflict shouldn't be forgotten. The Ottomans controlled Yemen when it was split between North and South in 1904, where North Yemen was ruled by the Ottomans and South Yemen was ruled by the British. However, following the First World War and the complete dismantling of the Ottoman Empire, North Yemen found itself independent and became an Islamic state ruled by imams. North Yemen only had 3 imams in total before it fell. The first imam of the fragile state was Imam Yahya Hamiduddin, who ruled until his assassination in 1948. He was succeeded by his son, Imam Ahmad bin Yahya. Ahmad bin Yahya was, in comparison to his father, a modernist. He worked toward modernizing the country, including reversing his father's ban on aircraft, and even worked toward more international engagement. However, he continued his father's draconian methods on law and order and remained essentially an autocrat, retaining control over even minor decisions throughout the kingdom. Despite his advances and family lineage, Yahya was deeply unpopular. During his time on the throne, a massive wave of Arab nationalism was sweeping through the Middle East and North Africa, started by Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, whose dream was to unite all Arab countries into one massive pan-Arab state. Nasser tried hard to make his dream a reality and established the United Arab Republic in February 1958, which initially consisted of Egypt and Syria. A month later, Imam Ahmad bin Yahya went to Damascus to bring Yemen into the fold. In exchange, he wanted to maintain his tenuous grip on the nation. To the people of North Yemen, being part of the United Arab Republic should have meant that they could be rid of their malevolent ruler. The Imam was ruthless, even being called medieval by his contemporaries, as he ordered decapitations and amputations for any dissidents. His laws were arbitrary and inconsistent, and the people suffered under him, and he was subjected to many attempted coups and assassinations. During one such attempt, multiple army officers emptied their revolvers into his body at point-blank range, only for the Imam to survive. Having grown up watching his grandfather and father rule, Muhammad al-Badr knew it would someday be his place to lead North Yemen. Al-Badr, however, was drawn to the growing wave of nationalism and modernism gripping the Arab world. Even though al-Badr was a huge admirer of Nasser's ideologies and began bringing in Egyptian experts to help modernize Yemen as early as 1959, it wasn't enough to squash the people's vitriol toward the royals. And none of this was lost on Yemen's once ally, Egypt. Even Nasser himself wanted to dispose of the royal family in Yemen. In January 1962, he began supporting the Free Yemen movement, a nationalist organization dedicated to throwing out the regime. He gave them money, an office, and even airtime on the radio to spread their ideology. Nasser wanted to be rid of the royals of North Yemen and the British of South Yemen so he could maintain his status as leader in the Arab world, a reputation he was losing due to the fact that the United Arab Republic was already unraveling. And as nationalist ideology spread further within Yemen, there was no shortage of groups vying for control over the fledgling nation. There had already been an assassination attempt on Imam Ahmad in June 1961, which left the ruler crippled. But he held on until September 1962, when he died in his sleep. After his father's death, Crown Prince Muhammad al-Badr became the Imam. It was barely a week later, on September 25th, when al-Badr began hearing shelling outside the royal palace and saw tanks advancing. and he was shocked to see the man he had personally appointed to be the commander of the royal guard, Abdullah al-Sallal, leading the attack on his home. And he wasn't acting alone. He was leading a coup that included police, military, and even students from the military academy. The revolutionaries battled the palace guard, still loyal to the Imam, and the fighting stretched all through the night, with tanks in the street and artillery firing incessantly. The revolutionaries took over the palace armory, secured the radio station, and advanced further into the palace grounds. When it became obvious there was no winning the fight, Imam al-Badr escaped through the garden at the back of his palace with his personal servants. By early the following morning, the revolutionaries had won, and come late morning, they had the entire palace secured and made a radio broadcast announcing that the regime had been overthrown and the new government, run by the revolutionaries, was now in charge. The Mutawakkil Kingdom of Yemen was now the Yemen Arab Republic, and Sallal was its president. Within the next couple of days, rumors began to fly around that al-Badr was dead, but Sallal knew he wasn't. Knowing that there were still royalists in the country, he gave them a warning, saying, "The corrupt monarchy which ruled for 1,000 years was a disgrace to the Arab nation and to all humanity. Anyone who tries to restore it is an enemy of God and man." By September 28th, al-Badr was confirmed to be in neighboring Saudi Arabia, where the royal family there was sympathetic to his plight. Nasser and his government were very happy with the success of the coup, and on September 29th, he sent a battalion of his special forces to Yemen's capital of Sana'a to act as Salah's personal guard. He also sent Egyptian General Ali Abdul Hamid to work with the Yemeni Revolutionary Command Council and assess what they needed so they could lend more support. The presence of the Egyptian military in Sana'a made the Saudis nervous as they feared invasion of their country, so they sent troops in to guard the border between the two countries. By early October, Prince Faisal of Saudi Arabia was already sending weapons to royalist tribes in the northern region of Yemen, and conflict seemed inevitable. They had remained loyal to the Imam because they were primarily Shia Muslim, just like al-Badr, and in 1963 alone, Saudi Arabia supplied them with $15 million worth of weapons. The Imam had the support of the ambassadors from London, Bonn, Amman, and Washington, D.C., whereas Sallal had his support from Cairo, Belgrade, Rome, and Moscow. In fact, the Soviet Union was all in on Sallal, and Nikita Khrushchev himself said that any act of aggression against Yemen will be considered an act of aggression against the Soviet Union. From there, the diplomatic negotiations started. The president of the US at the time, John F. Kennedy, was very wary of violence breaking out in Yemen as it had the potential to spread across the Middle East. He sent notes to both sides advising that Nasser should withdraw his troops and Faisal should stop supplying arms to the royalists. Nasser agreed, but only on the condition that Saudi Arabia and Jordan, who were also supplying weapons, stop all aggressive operations on the frontiers. Saudi Arabia and Jordan did not agree to this, not because they wanted an armed conflict in Yemen, but because they didn't trust Nasser to actually withdraw his troops. The Saudis were afraid that if Nasser had unfettered access to Yemen, he would then come for Saudi Arabia and its oil, and the Jordanians feared that if Nasser got his hands on Saudi Arabia, they would be next. The two countries asked the United States not to officially recognize Sallal and his government, stressing that the Imam would come back into power. The US held off as long as it could, but due to international pressure, it gave in and became the 34th country to formally recognize the Yemen Arab Republic on December 19, 1962. The next day, the United Nations followed suit and considered the Republic to be the only authority in Yemen. The only major world power that didn't recognize Sallal's government was Britain, which still held on to a colony in South Yemen called Aden. The British were afraid of Nasser's presence in North Yemen because they feared an Arab coalition which may threaten their hold over the territory. They needn't have worried though, because the people of South Yemen were very capable of freeing themselves. To learn more about the Aden emergency that ended the British colony, check out our previous video on the topic. All countries involved in the conflict in North Yemen tried to solve it through diplomacy for the following 6 months, but none of their efforts were successful. Nasser would not pull out his troops and the Saudis would not stop supplying weapons to the royalists. Soon enough, the violence started. By the beginning of 1963, the number of Egyptian troops in North Yemen had risen from 12,000 to 28,000, with a good number of Soviet bloc personnel joining them. And to help supplement the ground troops, Egypt also began sending in fighter bombers, with some going to the Saudi-Yemeni border and others to the northwest coast, where they began operating airstrikes. The Egyptian troops first worked feverishly in October and November of 1962 to stem the royalist advances in the northern portion of the nation, successfully doing so by the end of November when they took the city of Sada from the royalists. They then began working to secure major routes leading in and out of the capital Sana'a, as well as the major cities of Taiz and Hodeidah. This phase of the war, characterized by counterinsurgency operations, would become known as the Ramadan Offensive. It started in February 1963 when a task force comprised of 15 tanks, 18 trucks, 20 armored cars, and a number of jeeps took off from Sana'a and headed north to a town called Sada near the border to Saudi Arabia, with more garrison troops following behind. They moved from town to town, occupying territory wherever they could, but not without resistance. During one battle, 500 royalists spent a week fighting the Egyptians on a sheer-sided hill 25 miles or 40 kilometers outside of Sana'a. With all their fancy new weapons given to them by Faisal, they were able to kill 160 Egyptian soldiers along with 3 tanks and 7 armored cars. Despite their heroic resistance, the royalists lost strategic territory that limited their supply runs. They eventually found a way around this loss by using camels instead of trucks to move supplies through the mountainous northern regions while avoiding towns held by the Egyptians. By doing this, they were able to strengthen their armies, and slowly they began to recover areas previously lost to the Republican fighters. This sort of tug of war, losing and then regaining territory with neither side really having the upper hand, continued for more than a year and a half before any negotiations took place. In September 1964, Nasser and Faisal met in Alexandria for the Arab Summit. There, both sides agreed that they didn't want any more violence. By that time, Egypt had 40,000 troops in Yemen and had already lost an estimated 10,000 others. Both Nasser and Faisal had officially agreed to cooperate with each other, stop the armed conflict in Yemen, and come to a peaceful solution. Their talks went well. So well, in fact, that they were widely praised across the Arab world, and the United States even called them a major step toward an eventual peaceful settlement of the long civil war. Even Faisal left Egypt feeling good, saying that his heart was brimming with love for President Nasser. Following this successful peace talks, a secret conference was held in Sudan on November 2nd, during which the royalists and Republicans both agreed to a ceasefire that would go into effect on the 6th, less than a week later. 9 representatives on each side of the conflict worked out the terms of the ceasefire, with representatives from Egypt and Saudi Arabia overseeing the negotiations. The next phase was for the 168 tribal leaders in Yemen to get together for a conference on November 23rd. The plan was to name provisional national executives made up of 2 Republicans, 2 Royalists, and 1 neutral party. From there, they would run the country temporarily to plan a vote which would determine whether to continue running the country as a republic or go back to the royal system of imams. But before the conference could happen, and for reasons which are still unclear, the Egyptians resumed their bombings of royalist territories. The conference was initially pushed to November 30th, but as violence engulfed the region once more, the conference was postponed indefinitely. This time, the royalists, who had previously focused on counteroffensives, began more proactive measures to try and drive out the Egyptians. To accomplish this, they set to cutting off the Egyptian lines of communication within Yemen. The Egyptians had a web of communication spread out across the country that avoided much of the mountains, which the royalists controlled. The plan was to capture garrisons along the communications lines and thus prevent further Egyptian movement. They worked with the Num tribe, who pretended to align with the Egyptians and gave the royalists time to occupy 2 mountains surrounding one of their targets in exchange for first dibs on looting the garrison when they were done. They set up 75mm guns and mortars and aimed them right at the garrison. They then launched a surprise attack, during which they opened fire on the Egyptians, and the people of the Nam tribe jumped out from behind the rocks to attack. The attack was successful, and in no time at all, they had some of the Egyptian troops surrendering and the rest fleeing. The royalists had similar success at other garrisons as well, but by June 1965, the royalists had lost some 40,000 men, significantly more than Egypt, which had lost a little more than 15,000. Despite the recent royalist success, the Egyptians just wouldn't back down, and the two sides eventually reached a stalemate. That stalemate was rather costly for Egypt, who lost $500,000 a day to the war. In a speech to his people in 1965, Nasser said, "We're facing difficulties. We must work harder and make sacrifices. I have no magic button that I can push to produce the things we want." To try and help pay for the war without increasing the $3 billion of foreign debt that they were already facing, Nasser increased income tax and tariffs on non-essential imports and imposed a defense tax on all sales. But even with the additional money and additional troops, there were now 60,000 Egyptian troops in Yemen, and even with launching the largest offensive of the war yet, they couldn't break the stalemate. Further peace talks between Nasser and Faisal occurred the same year, and within 48 hours of meeting in Jeddah, the two had agreed to the gradual withdrawal of Egyptian troops over a 10-month period and the cessation of Saudi support to the royalists. But just like the peace talks from the year before, nothing came of this agreement, and the state of war continued. No matter the new strategy, the new money, or the new troops, the war pressed on and went nowhere. Not even a chemical attack on behalf of the Egyptians, although they deny it, in January 1967 that killed 140 people and injured another 270, could tip the scales. As 1967 wore on, Egypt was hemorrhaging money just to keep funding a war it was neither winning nor losing. The previous economic measures they had put in place to help foot the bill were no longer enough, so they added more. Taxes for middle and upper class citizens were increased, along with workers' monthly compulsory savings, which went up by 50%. On top of that, Nasser cut overtime pay, reduced the national sugar ration by a third, and halted all major industrial programs. And Yemen wasn't the only conflict the Egyptian military was wrapped up in. In June 1967, they lost 15,000 troops in the Six-Day War fought against Israel. To try and make up for their losses, they pulled 15,000 troops out of Yemen. With all this strain, Egypt couldn't hold much longer. In the wake of the Six-Day War, the Khartoum Resolution was issued. The document mostly covered peace efforts between Egypt and Israel, but Egypt also used it as a way to announce they were finally ready to end the war in North Yemen. Nasser reached out to Faisal and proposed they revive the Jeddah peace agreement from 2 years previous, which Faisal was happy to adhere to. They both signed a formal treaty, with Egypt promising to withdraw its remaining 20,000 troops and Saudi Arabia promising to halt its funding of the royalists. This time, each side stuck to its word. Sallal was furious with Nasser and accused him of betrayal. He wasn't done fighting and he needed Nasser's support. Without it, his popularity among his troops took a nosedive and they began turning on him. There were 2 bazooka attacks on the palace, and Sallal either fired or ordered the executions of several people in his cabinet. It was obvious that his hold on the country was becoming loose, so when he visited Nasser in Cairo later that year, Nasser advised him to go into exile, which he refused to do. Until the coup, that is. Nasser ordered his remaining troops not to interfere in any attempted coup, which was all but inevitable. The inevitable occurred on November 5th, when royalist forces, completely unopposed by Egyptian troops, surrounded the palace complex in Sana'a, leading to what would be known as the Siege of Sana'a in 1967. The Republic persisted instead of reverting back to the Imamites, and the new government was now headed by 3 of Sallal's former cabinet members. The political heat in Yemen was too hot though, and they soon fled the country, leaving behind Prime Minister Hassan al-Amri to be in charge of things. Though Egypt and Saudi Arabia had left, the war went on for 3 more years as the royalists refused to give in, and they fought until their remaining supplies ran dry. In 1970, Saudi Arabia formally recognized North Yemen as the Yemeni Arab Republic, bringing forth a formal end to the war. The Republicans and the remaining royalists signed a ceasefire, and the Republicans had officially won the war. In exchange for signing the ceasefire, the Saudi government gave North Yemen a grant of 20 million. Around the same time, South Yemen had finally kicked out the British and was in the process of forming its own country. North and South Yemen had a short border war in 1972, which ended with both sides agreeing to unite, a process that wouldn't conclude until 1990. Though the North Yemen Civil War had officially ended, violence never really stopped in that pocket of the world. Between North and South Yemen, and now Yemen as a whole, one conflict has just bled into the next over and over again, with much of the world, whether purposely or not, turning a blind eye. We hope that things eventually change. But what do you think of the conflict in North Yemen? Should Egypt and Saudi Arabia have ever gotten involved in the first place? What do you think of that conflict being referred to as Egypt's Vietnam? Tell us your thoughts and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.